Leading up to the spring of 2019, Russian woman Alyona Verde performed botched plastic surgeries on women, inflicting a degree of mutilation that led to her being dubbed Dr. Frankenstein in the media. Verde Antonina Gorbunova, by her real name, basically butchered her patients, most of whom needed corrective surgery in the aftermath. One patient, 33-year-old Anastasia Ismailova, went through 2 years of hell after Verde gave her a tummy tuck. The procedure resulted in Ismailova's skin sticking out of her sides like fishtails and her genitals being lifted into her stomach. A giant 3-inch thick scab formed over the wounds from the initial operation, and the doctor who corrected the procedure was surprised that Ismailova was still alive given the immense risk of lethal infection. Victim Evgenia Lanovaya went to Verde for eyelid surgery. She suffered extensive scars, misshapen eyes, and the inability to close her eyes. A third patient had to undergo a 6-hour corrective surgery procedure after Verde's work resulted in hypersized scars to her breasts, and a fourth patient was left looking like a pug and struggling to breathe following a botched nose job. Russian model Alana Mameva, an activist against plastic surgery abuses, led a social media campaign to bring the doctor to justice. Verde was arrested in April of 2019. She appeared in court wearing a fur coat and initially denied that she'd done anything wrong, claiming that her former patients had a vendetta against her. Alexander Bastrykin, chairman of the Investigative Committee of Russia, took over the inquiry, and in the aftermath, Verde offered a full confession. She pleaded guilty to causing grievous bodily harm in 7 cases in which she operated. Verde also admitted she had bought fake medical diplomas and wrongly used the title doctor. She was placed on house arrest in the city of Krasnodar as she awaited sentencing and faced a maximum of 6 years behind bars. Updates from June the 15th of 2020 indicated that Verde had died in her home after being in a coma and on a ventilator for 2 weeks. The 36-year-old had become ill after receiving a large injection of insulin, and her lawyer demanded an investigation to determine if there was any foul play, but the outcome of his request remained unclear. Number 7. Stephen Matthews. In 2023, a woman contacted law enforcement in Denver, Colorado, to report that she'd been drugged and abused by cardiologist Stephen Matthews. The man, who was at the time in his mid-30s, was arrested in March. The authorities suspected that he'd claimed more victims and urged members of the public to come forward. In May, 9 more women reported similar attacks that had taken place at Matthews' Denver townhouse between 2019 and 2023. As reported by Denver 7, the serial abuser created a profile on dating apps such as Hinge or Tinder, presenting himself as an athletic, handsome doctor with a dog. One of the victims reported, "He used my softness as a reason to target me." During the dates, Matthews spiked the women's drinks with an unknown substance that left them with fragmented memories of their time with him. Some woke up naked in bed next to him with virtually no recollection of how they'd gotten into that situation. Matthews would then reportedly gaslight the victims into thinking that what had transpired was their fault by telling them that they'd drunk too much or that they couldn't handle their liquor. The survivors reported in court that the attacks had left them with severe mental health repercussions such as anxiety, depression, and paranoia. Former Denver District Attorney Mitch Morrissey said that Matthews was one of the most prolific serial abusers in the history of Colorado. In August of 2024, he was convicted of 35 counts related to drugging 10 women and assaulting 8 of them. The sentencing judge castigated Matthews, describing him as a narcissistic monster and handing him the maximum sentence for his charges, 158 years in prison. Number 6. Giovanni Quintella Bezerra. In July of 2022, anesthesiologist Giovanni Quintella Bezerra was working at the Women's Hospital in São João de Meriti, Brazil, and went in for his 3rd C-section of the day. Hospital staff had reportedly become concerned with the amount of drugs he'd given his previous 2 patients. Staffers were able to change the room where the third surgery was to unfold and secretly recorded Bezerra as he took part in the procedure. The reality of the doctor's depravity went far beyond what they'd initially suspected. A team was working on the pregnant woman, only a few feet from Bezerra, but in addition to being focused on delivering the baby, they were unable to see the patient from the neck up due to the surgical drape. After he'd positioned himself near the patient's head and while he was obstructed from the other's view behind the drape, Bezerra was recorded orally abusing her. The attack lasted for 10 minutes, and when he was done, Bezerra cleaned the woman's mouth with gauze. After being caught in the act, he was arrested in the early hours of July the 11th. Police began investigating whether he'd similarly attacked his previous 2 patients on the day in question. 3 other women treated on different days came forward in the wake of the doctor's arrest to report that he'd abused them as well. Bezerra was indicted for assaulting a vulnerable person and faced a sentence of 8 to 15 years behind bars. Information on the case from January of 2024 indicated that he was being held at the Pedrolino Huelin de Oliveira prison in the Jeretzino complex in western Rio de Janeiro, and that his professional license was definitively revoked. Number 5. Nicholas Vanderhyde. A 40-year-old California chiropractor was arrested in June of 2024 for secretly recording patients and staff while they went to the bathroom at the Joint Chiropractic Clinic in Valencia. A small camera was found taped inside a cabinet, and it was strategically pointed in a direction to capture anyone sitting down at the toilet. It had allegedly been placed by Nicholas Vanderhyde and attached to a power bank, leading to suspicion that he was watching a live feed of people going to the bathroom and unwittingly revealing their privates to him. As reported by ABC7, the camera was in place for 3 days before it was discovered by a clinic employee in May of 2024. During that time, the device was believed to have captured about 20 people, including 4 minors. Patients reported that Vanderhyde would always insist they use the bathroom before receiving treatment. He was arrested on a felony count of possession of obscene material depicting a minor and for invasion of privacy. 17 patients from 11 families sued the clinic, alleging negligence, battery, harassment, and invasion of privacy. The allegations against Vanderhyde extended beyond him secretly recording patients. He reportedly performed questionable treatments that would have constituted battery. They included inner thigh massages in which he touched patients' genitals, and some of the plaintiffs added that he made harassing comments about their bodies. Joint Chiropractic was accused of ignoring Vanderhyde's behavior, thereby emboldening his offending. He was also reported to have had a history of harassment and misconduct, which the clinic blatantly overlooked. The case and lawsuit against him were ongoing as of the latest updates. Number 4. Robin Michael. In February of 2015, Australian Dr. Robin Michael and his wife Kerry were vacationing in Tasmania. After visiting a boutique brewery on February the 11th, they hiked up Mount Roland, took a photo at the top and had a picnic lunch. Family members became concerned after 63-year-old Robin made a lengthy Facebook post the following day. He claimed that Kerry had admitted to having an affair with one of his colleagues. As they were coming down the mountain, Robin wrote that he cracked and lost it, adding, "The English language cannot describe my anger and rage." In his post, he professed his love for his wife before adding, "In the heat of the anger with Kerry's admission, I had no control or influence over myself, and I have committed an act of pure evil and pray it failed." Robin was subsequently found by law enforcement at an East Devonport caravan park with self-inflicted injuries. He was taken to a hospital and recovered. 44-year-old Kerry was found dead, roughly 200 meters from the summit of Mount Roland, after she had succumbed to head trauma. Robin told law enforcement that as they argued over the woman's admission to the affair, she walked away from him at speed. He then claimed to have snapped, charged Kerry and struck her in the head with a rock he'd collected at the top of the mountain. He then wrestled his wife to the ground and continued bashing her head with rocks until she was dead. Robin told detectives that he was just trying to hurt her, adding, "I was like a deranged lunatic." A forensic pathologist noted that even if Robin had tried to call for help, it would have made no difference, as his wife died in a matter of minutes. Investigators went through the woman's phone and laptop in addition to interviewing the man with whom Robin suspected she was having an affair, but they found no evidence of infidelity. The doctor's first wife, Pamela, told the authorities that her ex had been jealous and violent during their relationship. She recalled him threatening her with a knife and spitting in her face during his outbursts. Robin's second wife, Lynn, reported similar incidents, including him hitting her in the face, pulling her to the ground and banging her head on the floor. He'd similarly accused his ex-wives of being unfaithful, one of them with the same man as Kerry. Following his arrest, Robin pleaded not guilty to the latter's murder. In June of 2015, while on remand, Robin was found dead by hanging in his cell at Risdon Prison. Number 3. Roger Abdelmassih. Leading up to the late 2000s, Brazilian Dr. Roger Abdelmassih had become nationally known for his work in the fertility field. He treated celebrities at his Sao Paulo clinic, with a list including the wives of soccer legend Pelé and former President Fernando Collor. In early 2009, allegations began circulating that Abdelmassih had forced himself on his patients. After a former employee denounced him, dozens of former patients came forward and accused the doctor of abusing them during medical examinations or when they were in recovery rooms after receiving fertility treatments. The attacks stretched back across 3 states between 1995 and 2008, with some occurring while the women were under sedation. Abdelmassih adamantly denied the allegations, claiming they came from competitors trying to frame him and patients who were either dissatisfied with his services or suffering from anesthetic hallucinations. He was arrested and on November the 23rd of 2010, convicted of abusing 56 patients. The 16th Criminal Court of Sao Paulo sentenced him to 278 years in prison. Abdelmassih was released as he awaited the outcome of his appeal, but the authorities ordered him to be taken back into custody after they learned that he was trying to renew his passport and potentially leave Brazil. In early 2011, Abdelmassih fled the country with his wife, former prosecutor Larissa Maria Sacco. They'd recently gotten married and she'd given birth to twin sons. Sacco, who was 36 years younger than Abdelmassih, resigned her position in 2011 shortly before going on the run with her husband and children. The disgraced doctor was initially believed to have crossed the border to Paraguay and then Uruguay. Abdelmassih's parents had come to Brazil from Lebanon, and investigators suspected he was trying to go back to the Middle Eastern country where he faced no risk of extradition. He became one of Brazil's most wanted criminals and was also added to Interpol's fugitive list. Brazilian law enforcement cooperated in their investigation with Paraguay's National Anti-Drugs Secretariat, or SENAD. On the afternoon of August the 19th of 2014, SENAD officers arrested Abdelmassih in the capital city of Asuncion, near a school where his and Sacco's children were enrolled. The next day, after over 3 years on the run, the 70-year-old was sent back to Brazil and imprisoned. Today's topic was requested by Waffle Attack 3347 and Nikki123BXD. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Carlo Mosca. Following a lengthy undercover investigation, an Italian doctor was arrested in late January of 2021 for giving his patients fatal doses of anesthetics. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, Carlo Mosca was in charge of the emergency department at Montechiari Hospital in the province of Brescia in Lombardy. The region where the hospital was located was the worst hit area of Italy in the late winter and spring of 2020, when the country overall reported hundreds of daily virus-related deaths. Italy was at that time the pandemic's epicenter in Europe, and harrowing photos of patients filling hospital corridors widely circulated in the media. Between November of 2019 and April of 2020, Montechiari saw a massive increase in orders for succinylcholine and propofol, drugs typically used in the emergency ward before patients were intubated. Records, however, indicated that only 5 patients were intubated during that period. In April of 2020, the authorities received an anonymous note which reportedly read, "You need to check out Dr. Mosca. He's mad. He's killing patients to free up beds." Mosca was accused of giving COVID patients that weren't intubated fatal doses of the aforementioned drugs so that he could clear space in the hospital and help the human resources of the staff physically and emotionally. Mosca falsified medical records to make the patients seem terminal. WhatsApp messages on the matter were exchanged between nurses and read, "Did he ask you to administer the drugs without intubating them?" And "This is crazy," along with, "I'm not killing patients just because he wants to free up the beds." Staffers reported that Mosca had asked them to leave the room when he administered the drugs, and one nurse noted that it was something that had never happened to them before. 61-year-old Natalie Bassi, a diabetic and heart disease sufferer, died on March the 20th after he was drugged by Mosca. Angelo Paletti, aged 80, died 2 days later. Neither was intubated, and analysis of their exhumed bodies confirmed foul play. Evidence indicated that after he found out he was under investigation, Mosca tried to get nurses to line up their stories with his version of events and cover for him. Aside from his involvement in the deaths of Bassi and Paletti, he was suspected of intentionally causing at least 3 other deaths. Mosca was charged with murder and falsifying health records, but he maintained that he was innocent. We will line up our release from a while back about when nurses go wrong. Some of them are even more evil than these doctors, so stick around after number 1 if you haven't seen that one yet. Number 1. Thomas Kwan. For years leading up to November of 2023, Englishman Thomas Kwan's relationship with his mother, Jenny Lueng, had become strained and difficult due to an inheritance dispute. Lueng and Kwan's father had gotten divorced in the late 1990s, and the woman was reported to have previously taken out £1 million from their joint account. Then, when Kwan's father passed away, the larger proportion of the will went to Kwan's younger brother. Kwan, who was born in Hong Kong before the family moved to England, felt that the decision went against Chinese culture and that he, as the eldest, should have received the largest share. He believed that his mother had stolen from his father and relentlessly pursued what he thought was a rightful claim on his inheritance. Kwan, who studied medicine at Newcastle University, became a family man and a successful GP at Happy House Surgery in Sunderland. He lived in a large detached home in Ingleby, Barwick, with his wife and young son. He nevertheless became money-obsessed to the point that he gave his mother a laptop secretly fitted with spyware so that he could track her finances as well as monitor her home life through the device's camera. In the years after her divorce, Lueng started a relationship with a man by the name of Patrick O'Hara. They would be together for over 20 years, and in 2021, she drafted a will which stated that in the event of her death, her house couldn't be sold without O'Hara's permission. Kwan was enraged by the decision, which he interpreted as yet another infringement on his inheritance. He stormed into Lueng's home and caused a scene, resulting in the police being called. No charges were filed, but the mother and son's relationship became further fraught. In the years that followed, Kwan relied on his medical expertise to create an elaborate plan to murder O'Hara, whom he came to view as an obstacle in his path to enrichment. In the fall of 2023, he sent the man multiple letters on NHS-headed paper, convincing him that he was entitled to an official home visit for a COVID booster shot. Kwan pretended to be a nurse by the name of Raj Patel, and the meeting was set for January the 22nd of 2024. For his ID, Kwan created a disguise that involved tanning his skin as well as wearing a wig and fake facial hair. He traveled to Newcastle in a Toyota Yaris with false number plates and booked a room at a Premier Inn under an assumed name. On the morning of January the 22nd, he donned his disguise, complete with a face mask, tinted spectacles, hat, and long coat. He went to his mother's home and, as Raj Patel, spoke in broken English with an Asian accent. Luwen remarked that he was the same height as her son, but Kwan's disguise proved otherwise effective, and the couple allowed him to carry out his supposed duties. He did various health checkups on them, and towards the end of the visit he injected O'Hara. Looking back on the shot, the latter remembered, "I felt instant excruciating pain. I had never in my life felt anything that painful before. I instantly thought that something had gone wrong." Kwan assured him that it was a slight allergic reaction before he hurried out of the home. In reality, he'd injected O'Hara with the poison iodomethane, a difficult-to-detect substance commonly used in pesticides. O'Hara, who was at the time in his early 70s, would spend weeks in the hospital fighting for his life. As a result, he developed a flesh-eating disease called necrotizing fasciitis in his left arm. O'Hara experienced full hair loss, fatigue, hallucinations, weight loss, and intense pain as the condition ravaged his health. Doctors had to remove large sections of tissue to stop the infection from spreading, but ultimately saved his arm. In the aftermath of being poisoned by Luwen's son, O'Hara ended his relationship with the woman, and in addition to his physical torment, he suffered from nightmares and PTSD. Kwan, whose in-disguise movements had been captured on CCTV, was arrested 2 weeks after administering the poisonous injection. Body cam footage of the arrest showed him answering the door while wearing striped pajamas and a woolly hat. He remained eerily calm as officers told him he was being taken into custody. Kwan refused to tell detectives what he'd used in the injection, but warned them to be cautious when searching his garage. He was determined to have had a morbid obsession with deadly substances, and his garage held a wide variety of hazardous chemicals including liquid mercury, thallium, arsenic, and sulfuric acid. On his computer, investigators found instructions on how to make ricin, as well as a copy of the Terrorist Handbook, a recipe for sodium cyanide, and a book called 10 Poisons Used to Kill People. In January of 2024, Kwan had searched for iodomethane nearly 100 times online. On the second day of his trial in October of 2024, 53-year-old Kwan pleaded guilty to attempted murder, and the following month he was jailed for 31 years. Number 8. Elizabeth Wetlaufer. Between 2007 and 2016, Canadian nurse Elizabeth Wetlaufer killed and injured roughly 14 people under her care. She first found employment at Care St. Care, an elderly home in Woodstock. While there, she started injecting patients with fatal doses of insulin. Her first victim was 84 years old James Wilcox, a veteran of World War II and a father of 6. During her time at the home, Wetlaufer struggled with alcoholism and substance abuse. She killed at least 6 more people at Care St. Care before she left the facility in 2014. Some of her victims survived, and Wetlaufer would later plead guilty to attempted murder in those cases. After Care St. Care, she killed another patient and injured 2 others as she sporadically found work in Ontario. In 2016, she entered a drug rehabilitation program at a psychiatric hospital in Toronto, where she confessed her crimes to the staff. The police were notified, and Wetlaufer was arrested. She was subsequently sentenced to 8 consecutive life terms. In her confession, the woman claimed that she knew the difference between right and wrong, but added that she had uncontrollable urges. She said that God, the devil, or some other unknown force or entity wanted her to kill. Before taking her life, she could hear herself laughing and claimed that it felt like a cackling from the pit of hell. The laughter, she added, wasn't audible, but rather a feeling in her chest. For her crimes, Wetlaufer is regarded as being among the worst serial killers in the history of Canada.
Do you think these people died peacefully? Did they struggle at all?
All the people you've talked about so far died peacefully, in my opinion. And I am sorry. I'm sorry for what the families went through at the time, and I'm extremely sorry for what they're going to go through. It's awful.
Number 7. Niels Hurgel. Judging from the total number of victims he's suspected to have claimed, former nurse Niels Hurgel is the most prolific serial killer in the history of peacetime Germany. In 1999, he started work at a clinic in Oldenburg. It wasn't long before the facility started to notice a sharp increase in resuscitations and inexplicable deaths, the vast majority of which had occurred while Hergel was on duty. The nurse was constantly present in emergency situations. In fact, it was Hergel who'd injected the patients with ajmaline, sotalol, calcium chloride, or other substances. He'd done so, according to his prosecutors, out of boredom and the desire to display his resuscitation skills. In 2002, he transferred to Delmenhorst Clinic. Again, emergencies relating to arrhythmia or sudden drops in blood pressure started to spike. A police investigation was launched in 2005 after staff caught Hergel sabotaging a patient's injection with ajmaline. Hergel was arrested and initially sentenced to life in prison for the murder of 6 patients. The inquiry into his activity as a nurse continued, and in 2019 he was convicted of a total of 85 murders. Further investigative efforts revealed 300 possible victims, spanning a period of 15 years. Number 6. Kimberly Clark Saenz. Shortly after Kimberly Clark Saenz was hired as a nurse at a DaVita dialysis clinic in Lufkin, Texas, the facility saw a dramatic rise in patients becoming ill during treatment. A number of them had gone into cardiac arrest, which is extremely rare for dialysis patients. In April of 2008, the authorities were called to the clinic after 2 patients reported seeing Saenz inject bleach into patients' dialysis lines. Several syringes used by her then tested positive for bleach. When questioned by the police before the officers even mentioned the substance, Saenz claimed she'd used bleach to clean dialysis lines. Further research revealed that in April, she'd been present at every incident in which a patient had died. Moreover, her hard drive revealed Google searches concerning the lethality of bleach. As part of the investigation, an analytical chemist proved that the bleach had entered the patient's bloodstream, causing red blood cells to explode and release iron, which sent them into cardiac arrest. Saenz was sentenced to life, plus 60 years for killing 5 patients and injuring 5 others, although she was believed to have been involved in many other incidents. Number 5. Piotr Zelenka. From May to December of 2006, Czech nurse Piotr Zelenka killed 7 people under his care and attempted to murder 10 others. At the time, he was working at a clinic in Havlíčkův Brod, about 60 miles southeast of Prague. Zelenka administered lethal injections in which he used heparin, a blood-thinning drug that caused massive internal bleeding. The main theory is that he killed his patients as a twisted test for doctors at the clinic, whom he didn't believe were proficient enough to discover his crimes. He confessed upon his arrest and, in February of 2008, was sentenced to life in prison. Number 4. Kristen Gilbert. Massachusetts nurse Kristen Gilbert was convicted in 2001 for the murder of 4 patients at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northampton. She'd started work at the center in the late 1980s. Before long, other nurses jokingly called her the Angel of Death due to the high number of deaths that occurred on her watch. Gilbert would inject her patients intravenous bags with massive amounts of epinephrine, and once they went into cardiac arrest, she'd attempt to resuscitate them. She'd create these crisis situations to display her perceived proficiency as a nurse, but also to attract the attention of then-boyfriend Justin Perot. He was a Veterans Affairs police officer, and hospital procedure dictated he had to be present in case of an emergency. In the midst of mounting suspicions, Gilbert left the hospital in 1996. Afterwards, she checked herself into psychiatric hospitals at least 7 times. In 1998, she called in a bomb threat at the VA Medical Center in retaliation to her former colleagues and Perot. She was arrested, at which point her past crimes were investigated by the police. Perot told the authorities that Gilbert had confessed the murder to him during a call from the psychiatric ward. VA staff linked Gilbert to over 300 medical emergencies and up to 350 deaths. She was only convicted for 4 of them and ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment. Number 3. Edson Isidoro Guimarães. In 1999, a hospital porter at the Salgado Filho Hospital in Rio de Janeiro witnessed nurse Edson Isidoro Guimarães as he fatally injected a patient with potassium chloride. Guimarães was arrested and several suspicious deaths were subsequently linked to him. The man, who'd come to be known as the Nurse of Death, confessed to 5 murders. He claimed that he'd chosen patients, mainly those suffering from AIDS, who were in irreversible comas. Guimarães said that he was at peace with the killings, as he'd spared the patients and their families of prolonged pain. He was convicted of 4 killings and sentenced to 76 years in prison. It's believed that from January the 1st to May the 4th of 1999, he was responsible for up to 131 victims. Rio's Secretary for Public Security suspected that money may have also been a motive for Guimarães' crimes, as every time he reported a death to a funeral home, he was paid $60. Number 2. Jane Toppan. American serial killer Jane Toppan, active from 1885 to 1901 in Massachusetts, was born Honora Kelly into a nightmarish household. Her father was an abusive alcoholic who, according to rumors of his mental instability, ultimately sewed his own eyelids shut while working as a tailor. Kelly spent a few years in an orphanage before being placed as an indentured servant in the home of the Toppan family. She took the name Jane Toppan and began training as a nurse. She would come to be known as Jolly Jane because of her positive disposition. Beyond the facade, however, lay a disturbed serial killer. Toppan experimented with morphine and atropine on sick elderly patients. She altered their prescribed doses and would get a sexual thrill from seeing them drift in and out of consciousness. Toppan fondled her victims as they died and, according to one report, looked into their eyes trying to understand the inner workings of their souls. Her killing spree continued after she became a private nurse. In 1901, she moved in to take care of the elderly Alden Davis after the passing of his wife. Unbeknownst to him, it was Toppan who had killed her. Within weeks, she fatally poisoned Davis, his adult daughters, and his sister. She was detected following a toxicology report from her latest victim. Toppan confessed to 31 murders but was concretely linked to 12. At one point, Toppan was quoted as saying that she wanted to have killed more people, helpless people, than any other man or woman who ever lived. Number 1. Charles Cullen. During his 16-year activity as a nurse in New Jersey, Charles Cullen killed numerous patients, mainly by injecting them with insulin, digoxin, and epinephrine. Cullen dropped out of high school and, after joining the Navy, passed the rigorous psychological exams necessary for working on a submarine. While he was serving aboard the Woodrow Wilson, an officer found him at the missile controls, wearing scrubs, gloves, and a surgical mask. Cullen gave no reason for his behavior. He'd be admitted to psychiatric wards on several occasions. After he was medically discharged, he started working as a nurse and murdered his first victims in 1988 at St. Barnabas. Due to a national nurse shortage, Cullen was able to move between hospitals whenever suspicions arose. He was detected in 2003 while working at the Somerset Medical Center. The police kept him under surveillance and, through a fellow nurse wearing a wire, found enough evidence for a probable cause arrest. Cullen agreed to cooperate with the authorities in exchange for them not pursuing the death penalty. He confessed to killing 40 people under his care and was given 18 consecutive life sentences. Cullen claimed that he'd overdosed terminal patients to spare them from going into cardiac or respiratory arrest. Yet, not all of his victims were terminal, and many were on the mend. He also said that he'd lived his life in a fog and blacked out during most of the murders. Experts who've investigated his activity believe that he may have been responsible for 400 deaths, making him the most prolific serial killer in recorded history. Thanks for watching. Would you rather only be treated by a shaman or go to a doctor who has a violent criminal record? Let us know in the comments section below.